In Holland, a small and peaceful town in Michigan that is well known for its Dutch background, we meet Nancy Vandergroot digging through her jewelry boxes, clearly upset because one of her earrings is missing. As her frustration builds, Nancy becomes convinced that the earring did not just get lost on its own, and her thoughts quickly turn toward the young nanny who works for the family. Nancy confronts the nanny in an uncomfortable way, but the girl has no idea what she's being accused of. Without stopping to think or look for evidence, Nancy fires the nanny on the spot, leaving the young girl embarrassed and clearly hurt as she leaves the house. This single decision quietly reveals the kind of person Nancy is becoming, someone driven more by suspicion than truth, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. After the nanny's gone, Nancy's son Harry explodes with anger, yelling at his mother and accusing her of being unfair and cruel. Furious and upset, Harry calls his father, Fred, who works as an optometrist. Over the phone, Harry vents about what happened, and Fred promises they will talk about it once he gets home. Later that day, Fred returns and takes Harry to his workshop, where he has built a very detailed miniature version of the town of Holland. As they work together, Fred casually tells Harry that women tend to overreact and advises him not to argue too much with his mother. That evening during dinner, Nancy brings up the missing earring again, but Fred barely reacts. Instead, he calmly mentions that he will be traveling to Frankenmuth for a one-night work conference. Nancy does not like this news at all, however. She keeps her feelings to herself and says nothing. The following day, we learn that Nancy works as a teacher at Holland High School. After her classes are over, she spends some time talking with her colleague, Dave Delgado, about her husband's upcoming work trip, and Dave casually mentions that he actually has an eye appointment with Fred later that week. That night, Nancy's unease grows stronger, so she goes into Fred's workshop and starts searching through his drawers, until she comes across a box of Polaroid film, which immediately raises suspicion because there are no photos inside and they do not even own a Polaroid camera. The next day, while checking Fred's pants, Nancy finds a parking ticket from Madison, and she realizes that Fred may not have been where he claimed to be. Later at school, Nancy talks to Dave again and admits that she's starting to believe her husband might be having an affair, explaining everything from the Polaroid film to the parking ticket, and revealing that Fred lied about his location. Dave is shocked and struggles to understand how someone like Fred could betray a woman as beautiful as Nancy. A few days later, Fred announces another business trip. This time he'll stay for 3 days. The following day, Nancy meets Dave at a diner and tells him she wants to break into Fred's office because she believes the missing Polaroid photos are hidden there and could finally reveal the truth. With Dave's eye appointment coming up, Nancy suggests that he slip into the clinic's bathroom and slightly crack open a window so she can get inside later without being noticed. Dave feels uncomfortable about the plan, but when Nancy gently touches his hand, he slowly agrees. That evening, Nancy tells Fred that she plans to go out with her friend Gwen on Friday, and Fred gives his approval without much thought. When Friday afternoon arrives, Dave goes in for his eye checkup. After the exam, he goes to the bathroom and carefully cracks the window just enough to make it usable later, but he soon spots a police officer nearby, and panic takes over. He leaves the clinic immediately and later meets Nancy to tell her that he cannot go through with the plan, even making up an excuse about having a date that night, which visibly hurts Nancy and fills Dave with guilt. Unable to handle it, he admits that he was lying, and in that emotional moment, they share an intense kiss. That night, Nancy and Dave arrive outside Fred's office, and Dave helps her climb in through the window before staying outside to keep watch. At the same time, Fred is out at a diner with Harry when he receives a frantic call from Gwen, who says her son's contact lens is stuck. She asks if they can come to the clinic right away, and Fred agrees. Meanwhile, inside the office, Nancy opens a strange Polaroid album filled with photos of houses, including one image showing a woman standing next to a sign that reads, "Bologna Queen." Outside, Dave waits nervously in his car and soon spots Fred arriving with Gwen and her son. He quickly calls Nancy to warn her, and Nancy escapes through the office window just in time. Later, after treating Gwen's son, Fred casually mentions the supposed trip Nancy was meant to take with Gwen, only for Gwen to say they never planned anything like that. Elsewhere, Nancy and Dave finally give in to their emotions and make love, which is ironic because she's trying to find out if her husband is doing the same thing she just did. From this moment on, the story stops being about whether Fred is guilty and starts asking whether Nancy herself is crossing the same moral lines she claims to fear. Back at the clinic, Fred enters his office and notices a piece of Nancy's jewelry lying on the floor. The next day, as Nancy is looking through a jar filled with old buttons, she suddenly finds her missing earring and feels guilty for accusing the nanny. Moments later, Nancy finds a jewelry box waiting for her in the bedroom, a gift from Fred. Fred calmly tells her that he knows she did not go out with Gwen the night before and asks for her trust. Nancy apologizes and promises to do better. In the days that follow, she tries hard to repair her marriage, but no matter how much effort she puts in, she cannot stop thinking about Dave. So one evening, she finally breaks down and calls him, confessing that she wants to leave her husband for him. Dave warns her to be cautious, explaining that if she leaves Fred for him, the entire town could turn against them, and she might even lose Harry. Instead, he suggests that they first gather real proof of Fred's affair. The idea excites Nancy, who agrees immediately. A few days later, Fred packs his things again and leaves town for yet another trip. Nancy asks a trusted friend to watch over Harry, then meets up with Dave. Together, they decide to quietly follow Fred. They trail his car as he drives farther and farther away from town. After hours of driving, Fred finally pulls into a hotel parking lot and heads inside. Dave tells Nancy to stay in the car while he goes after Fred to see where he's going. A short time later, her phone vibrates with a message from Fred himself, telling her that he is staying in room 307. Nancy then walks into the hotel lobby and tells the receptionist that she's Fred's wife and needs access to his room. Inside the room, she starts going through the shopping bags Fred bought and finds handcuffs, men's underwear, and dog treats. She quickly takes photos of everything with her phone so she has proof. Later, as Nancy and Dave go through the photos, their emotions spill over, and they end up kissing. One thing leads to another, and they make love in the car the whole night. The next morning, Nancy wakes up and realizes she needs to return home to pick up Harry. Dave, however, feels that the photos alone are not enough proof and believes they need to catch Fred in the act. So, he decides to stay behind and keep watching. Once home, Nancy wanders into Fred's workshop, unable to ignore the growing fear inside her. She looks closely at the miniature town Fred has been working on. Suddenly, she notices the words, "Lacey Ann for Bologna Queen," written on one of the small model houses. Shocked, she immediately looks up the name online and finds a phone number. When she calls it, she learns that Lacey Ann disappeared 3 years ago and was later found dead. She digs deeper and soon realizes that in each of those locations Fred had been to, women have gone missing or been found dead under strange circumstances. Meanwhile, Dave follows Fred deep into a wooded area until Fred stops at a remote cabin. He watches as Fred greets a woman at the door and carefully records everything, convinced he finally has the proof he needs. But curiosity gets the better of him, and instead of leaving, he decides to go inside the cabin himself. Inside the cabin, Dave hears low groaning sounds coming from another room. Holding his camera tightly, he slowly walks toward the noise and opens the door. To his shock, he sees Fred slitting the woman's throat. Fred notices him, and soon, a violent fight breaks out. Fred grabs Dave by the throat, but Dave manages to stab him and break free. Even though he's badly injured, Fred chases after Dave. They crash through a window and fall outside, both bleeding heavily. Dave manages to run to a lake dock and thinks he has finally escaped, but Fred suddenly appears again. As the fight continues, Dave brutally stabs him once more. This time, Fred stumbles backward and falls into the lake, sinking beneath the water. The next day, Dave returns to town and meets Nancy, who is already terrified by everything she has uncovered. Dave confirms her worst fear, telling her that Fred was indeed a serial killer, but didn't mention he killed him. Dave suggests they leave town immediately, but Nancy hesitates, suggesting instead they wait until the Tulip Festival, when the town will be busy. When the day of the Tulip Festival finally arrives, the whole town gathers to celebrate. Nancy tries to stay calm, but her peace is shattered when neighbors casually mention that Fred has returned from his trip. Soon, she finds Dave, who urgently tells her that Fred is at the festival and they need to leave immediately. Nancy pulls away from Dave and rushes to find Harry instead. She and her son flee to a nearby motel. Soon after, Dave arrives and begs to be let in, but Nancy hesitates. So Dave finally tells her everything, explaining how he stabbed Fred and how he believed Fred drowned. Shocked and angry, Nancy confronts him for lying. Dave suggests going to the police, but Nancy refuses, afraid it would ruin Harry's life. During the argument, Nancy accidentally hits Dave in the head with the land phone, badly injuring him. After apologizing, Nancy rushes to get Harry, only to discover he is gone. She goes outside and sees him sitting calmly by the lake with Fred. Fred asks Harry to wait in the car. Once they're alone, he tells Nancy he's disappointed in her actions and insists he never crossed any boundaries in their marriage. He also claims that the man responsible for those murders isn't his real self, that his real self exists only with his family, and suggests they start over again. As they drive home together, Nancy suddenly tells him that Harry is not wearing his seatbelt and demands he stop. When Fred hesitates, she raises her voice until he pulls over. She tells Harry to run, and once he is safe, she pulls out a gun. A brutal struggle ensues. Fred's face is badly injured, yet he still fights back, trying to strangle her. However, Nancy grabs one of her heels and strikes him again and again until Fred finally collapses motionless in a pool of blood. In the end, Holland isn't about uncovering a monster, but about how fear, denial, and obsession can slowly turn ordinary people into something just as dangerous. The movie ends with Nancy returning to the motel only to discover that Dave is gone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more movie recaps.